Welcome to Perspectives El Paso. I'm Professor Leon Blevins, Professor of Government at El Paso Community College. We're sitting here at Community College, and this is October of 2015. Before I introduce my guest, I want to mention a little story. When our campus started, we were not in this building such as I'm communicating with you from today. We were in old Army buildings at Fort Bliss in what was called Logan Heights. That's close to where Chapin High School is today. I had a friend, Dr. Dick Harley. We lived close to each other on the east side of town, near Yarborough Drive in Montwood. And we carpooled back and forth, and we were going down Fred Wilson Road on a regular basis for several years. We were at Fort Bliss for 7 years in old buildings. And the war in Vietnam was winding down. And one day we're driving down Fred Wilson Road, and I said, Dick, look over there on the railroad track. They're bringing back camouflage vehicles from Vietnam. And so they were unloading them. A couple of years went by, and we were going down Railroad Drive one day, and I said, Dick, look at those railroad cars. They're loading some of this military equipment on it, and it's being painted desert brown instead of jungle green. My prediction is we're going to have some military action in the Middle East in the near future. Now, that would have been about 1976, somewhere in there, 77. And sure enough, in 1990, a war broke out in Iraq and Kuwait. And when they loaded those vehicles up on railroad cars, took them to Houston, Texas, put them on ships, and shipped them to Saudi Arabia and to Kuwait to combat a dictator named Saddam Hussein. This T-shirt comes from that particular period of time, Operation Desert Storm, and there's a drawing of Iraq, and it says, "Don't mess with U.S." A few weeks ago at Valle Verde campus, I was walking through a lounge area, and I saw a young student sitting there studying, and he was wearing some kind of military shirt, like a unit shirt from the Middle East. So I stopped and introduced myself to this fellow. His name is David Watts. David, glad you consented to be on this show.
Thank you for having me.
So we're going to talk a little bit. I asked David this question: did you serve in the combat area of Afghanistan or Iraq? And he said, yes, I served in both places. Before we talk about those places that he served, we want to know a little bit about you, David. Where are you from originally?
I'm from a small town about 2 hours south of Seattle called Puyallup, Washington.
Okay. Say it again.
Puyallup.
That's not easy to say.
No.
Yeah, I've had relatives in Washington State and been up there a couple of times, and we're glad to have you. Well, then, how did you end up in military service? Did you join while you were living there?
Yes, I did.
Okay.
I'd originally joined to get money for college. I wanted to be a firefighter.
Okay. Now, what year was that you joined?
2006, in December.
2006. Did the attack of 9/11 on the buildings in New York and the Pentagon have anything to do with you wanting to go into service?
At the time, those were a small part of the reason. The biggest reason, like I said, was I'd wanted to be a firefighter and I needed money for school.
Okay.
But 9/11 was always kind of there in the back of my mind.
Right, exactly. Well, I've had some that they were intense on going into military service to go fight and defend the United States against the people that attacked us on 9/11. I actually had some that were that serious about it. That was the reason. Now, I brought some fatigues here, and it says Blevins, U.S. Army. Blevins, that's my name. I have a granddaughter, Allison Blevins, that she and her boyfriend at that time, they joined the Army Reserves for the same reason you joined the Army, was to get some money to go to school. Now, Allison was registered to be in one of my classes when the war in 2003 broke out, George W. Bush. She didn't get to come and be in my class because she was sent to Fort Leonard Wood in Missouri for some basic training in the Army Reserves. Where did they send you for your training?
I also attended basic combat training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri.
Oh, my goodness. That was just basic training?
Yes.
Okay. But you still had your mind on becoming a firefighter. Did that ever develop? When you went in the service, did you ever do any firefighting?
I didn't. I actually attended basic training, and in my weeks there, I came to really actually appreciate being in the Army and decided that I wanted to make that my career instead.
So how long did you actually serve in the Army?
I served a total of 8 years with 3 tours.
Okay, 3 tours. And your tours were Afghanistan 1 or 2 or what?
I served 2 tours in Iraq and then 1 tour in Afghanistan.
Okay. What were your job assignments in those 2 locations?
My first tour, I was actually an MOS qualified fueler, but I was assigned to a provisional infantry company doing dismounted patrols through a city called Kiara and Mosul in Nineveh province, northern Iraq.
Okay, we've heard on the news lately about Mosul being taken over by ISIL or ISIS. How were your feelings about that when you heard that a city that you helped to defend against the Taliban, wasn't it? No, the Taliban was in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Okay. Are the Al-Qaeda and others that were over in Afghanistan. How did you feel when you heard that Mosul had fallen to these other people?
It was actually quite upsetting. Me and my friends had fought to, defend that city for the Iraqi people and for their elected government, and to see that it had fallen to invaders on foreign soil was actually quite disheartening.
All right. And that was a very strategic city for economics and for oil and other kinds of things at that time.
Yes, sir.
Okay, well, good. Now, I've had some people talk a lot about heroes. So they'll say, oh, he's in the service. They'll go over and say, I want to thank you, you're a hero. I've always felt that not everyone that is in military service is a hero. They want to go to school to get some money. They just do their job. But you're placed in situations when you're sent to combat zones. Did you see some of your buddies and friends that you felt were acting in heroic ways? They were going above and beyond what was required of them?
In my mind, all of me and my friends, we just, we were there, we did our job. Probably the most heroic actions, so to speak, were my friends who were combat medics. We did have some friends who were wounded or killed in action, and no matter what, they were always out there trying to do what they could for our friends, so they always stick in my mind as...
Sometimes we've had experiences in the military that people were conscientious objectors. They would not carry arms and fight in combat, but they were willing to join and serve in the medics, and that can be very dangerous work. Now, Allison, my granddaughter that went into the Army Reserves, we asked her about her training at Fort Leonard Wood. So they trained her in basic, and then they trained her to be a specialist driver of big equipment, like road building equipment and big trucks, tanker trucks or whatever. And she said, that's not going to be very dangerous, even if we go to a combat zone. I said, it will too, because you're not trained to carry those weapons and defend yourself. You're trained to drive trucks. And would you believe the 507th Maintenance Company from Fort Bliss were among the first casualties and people captured as POWs in the Iraq War of 2003, rescued by the Marines and brought back to Fort Bliss?
The 507th, the transportation company actually had a big impact on non-combat arms soldiers training now. As I said, I was originally trained to be a petroleum supply specialist. And after the 507th was captured, the training mindset changed from, oh, you're not supposed to, be a fighter, you're going to be behind the lines, to this sort of asymmetric warfare where you need to be ready to use your rifle or your sidearm to defend yourself and to fight the enemy, because there is no front lines as there were in the Korean War or World War II
or even one uniformed army against another uniformed army.
Exactly.
How do you deal with IUDs? Were you ever in an experience where you saw some of the vehicles blown up by IUDs?
I was, in both Iraq and Afghanistan.
Oh, and that's tough. That's really tough. Let me ask you about people that trained you, mentors. Were there some people that you worked under, they trained you for these things that you really want to remind the public about?
Yeah, there was my first squad leader, Staff Sergeant Jose Cruz. He was really down to earth. Staff sergeant. He served with me. He kind of taught me, the basics of being a soldier and keeping my head on a swivel, so to speak, is a term that we use in the Army. And then there was also Command Sergeant Major David Nunn, who was an infantryman throughout his entire career. He had served 20 plus years, including with the 75th Ranger Regiment in Panama, before going to Desert Storm and Iraq and Afghanistan as well.
Wow. Were you married when you went into the military service?
I was not.
But you've gotten married since then?
Yes.
Okay. Were you married when you had some of these deployments?
Yeah, my last two, I was married to my wife.
Do you have any children?
We don't have any children.
But even if you don't have children, it's still difficult for the spouses when someone's gone over to be involved in combat.
It can be. That's one of those things that really depends on the spouse. My wife really made the effort to get together with other wives from my units, and they would go out and have dinner together, or maybe go catch a movie together.
Right.
Her and one of her friends went and saw Al Pacino when he was at the Plaza downtown.
Okay.
And so that was one of the highlights of of our time away
Yeah.
from
Oh,
each
yeah.
other.
So military dependents, a very supportive group. I had an interesting experience when I guess it was Desert Storm broke out. I had some night classes that had 88 students could enroll because it was a big classroom. And when Desert Storm broke out, it seemed like that was August of like 1990 or something. And they went into combat in January of 91 until about April or May of 91. It was a short war, mainly lots of air power. And I walked in one night and there were like 55 students there instead of 88. And I said, what's happened? What's with the enrollment? And a lot of them had gone to fight. They were Fort Bliss, coming at night to take classes. But even bigger number were the dependents who went back home to live with relatives while this war was going. They didn't know how long the war was going to be. And so you probably saw some of that, and the loneliness of some of your comrades who were married and had children.
Yes, I actually had a friend when I was deployed to Afghanistan who missed the birth of his second or third child due to being deployed.
Okay, now we have a new phenomenon. It's called Skype. It used to be you couldn't connect electronically, and now we have Skype. Did you ever see people using Skype to communicate with loved ones?
In Iraq, all the time. There was a lot of Iraqi merchants who were providing internet service on base. In Afghanistan, we were just so isolated. We could only really use what internet we did have access to. We could only really use to email back and forth with each other.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about the populations. Say the population, the general population of Iraqis. Now, of course, they've been having religious warfare for centuries. But the Iraqi people, and then let's transpose over to Afghanistan. How did you find the interaction of you and your troops with the Iraqis and then with the Afghans?
They were both pretty receptive. The general populace, they were both generally receptive of us. Almost grateful because of the conditions they had prior to us coming. In contrast to how they were living with us there, was just night and day. And for the most part, they were actually thankful to have been liberated, so to speak. But there was a few more conservative elements, religious conservative elements, who did not want us there. And when I kind of think about it, though, their religious conservatism clashed with the kind of individual freedom that we as Americans expect for everyone. So
like alcohol and clothing style and dress and all of that. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so these Islamic conservatives were not as happy for us to be there.
Was that pretty true in both countries?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now talk about translators. You had to have translators to help you deal with this. Weren't some of them ostracized by their fellow people from their country for translating for Americans?
Yes. Actually, every interpreter I met had put in the paperwork to get a visa to come to the United States. And it was even more apparent in 2011 in my second tour to Iraq. We were one of the very last units in Iraq before the draw out, and everyone was, can you help me, with my visa? What do I need to do? I haven't heard anything. And to my knowledge, we actually left quite a few of our interpreters that had helped us behind.
And some of them are probably dead by now.
Yes, probably.
Oh my goodness sakes. What about the politics? Now, you told me that you're majoring in political science.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we want the audience to know that you're majoring in the field that I've been in for so many years in political science. What about while you were there in either of these countries and you heard about the change in administration, President Obama was elected, and you heard discussion going on about how Bush had sent troops and how Obama is now trying to get us out of the wars, okay? What kind of chit-chat was going on between you in the service with regard to this transition?
To be honest, prior to President Obama's election, there was very little political talk on a national scale. You'd hear soldiers talking about their hometown politicians, their state politicians, but never really anything at the federal level. After President Obama's election, and especially in 2011, that's when you heard a lot of friction going on between those who supported President Obama and those who felt that he wasn't exactly keeping the nation's best interests at heart.
Okay, but would they want to extend the tours of people or have more? I know some people here have been in 3 and 4 and 5 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq, some that we go to church with, for example. What about that? Would some of them want to just stay there forever in large numbers?
I think ultimately, I know like for me personally and maybe for a few of my friends, I think we just want to actually have accomplished something. I think when you're talking about Mosul being retaken by ISIS, by these Islamic extremists, we felt that our mission had failed, that we hadn't accomplished anything. And so I think for us who have actually fought, I don't think we care how long it would take, just so long as our mission that we had gone over there and spent so much time away from our families and even some of us who have lost friends.
Right.
Just as long as we actually accomplished something.
Okay, but let me put you on the spot. Would you be willing to re-up and go back in and go back to combat to save Mosul again?
Yes.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. I became a believer. Okay. I saw how the Iraqi population was living. I saw businesses flourishing. I saw Mosul at the time had a Christian population of about 35,000, right. Including a Catholic diocese there, which has now all been eradicated due to the Islamic extremists. So given the chance, I honestly would like to think that I would go back and do what I could.
Good. Okay, let's get you to give your best advice to a young person just getting out of high school as to whether he should join the Army.
I would say 100%. Even if it's just for the material gains, you do 3 years and you have 100% paid for by the post 9/11 GI Bill. And so 3 years to serve your country, learn a little discipline, get a little bit in shape that you may not have been in shape kind of when you were playing high school football. But even then, I think putting some time in serving your country kind of makes you appreciate the freedoms that we do have that a lot of us take for granted. I know as a high schooler, I took all my freedoms for granted. It wasn't until I put on that uniform and surrendered those rights that I really appreciate them more now being out of the Army.
For a year, my wife and I, Shanna and I, we had a young German exchange student live with us, Stefan Radzanowski. In fact, I interviewed him for this television show, his perspective on the U.S. before he got here and what he discovered when he came over from Germany. It wasn't the impression he had in his mind. And we talked about in Germany, the government there requires students to either join the military or be involved in some kind of social service area, such as medical or education or something. Give a year of your life to your nation in community service. What do you think about that idea for the United States?
I don't like it, which I know sounds kind of contradictory. But
I can see where you're coming from.
I like to think I'm a student of history, even if I am studying political science. But our country was founded on a citizen army. We did not have a draft until the Civil War, and by that time we had already fought 3 wars against Britain or 2 against Britain and 1 against Mexico.
Right.
We come from a society, a foundation of not requiring federal service of any sort. So while I might stress and say, yes, national service would be good for an individual if they want, I think for our nation, it goes against kind of everything that we had been founded on.
Okay. Well, have you had discussions with some people that you felt were desensitized to all of you that were over there in combat, and they were just here having a good time in the United States?
Yeah.
Did you and your buddies discuss that and kind of resent that they weren't really thinking and supporting you as much as maybe they should?
We kind of were angry that they could be so ignorant, but at the end of the day, we just kind of let it roll off our shoulders because we weren't there for them. At the end of the day, what really mattered to us was, our friends, our buddies, the guys to the left and right of us.
Mm-hmm.
So,
the band of brothers.
Yes, sir.
No, the band of brothers. Well, what other things should we know, before our time runs out, about going to the Middle East on these deployments? What did I not ask you about that you think we should know? That's a tough question.
I would say you really can't take everything you hear in the news at face value. There are plenty of people in the Middle East and Iraq and Afghanistan who do support a fundamentalist government, whether it be ISIL or
Right.
Taliban, but there's also plenty others who want an American kind of individual freedom that we have, and then there's some who are, right in the middle, who just kind of really want the choice to be able to choose for themselves and choose for their own country.
Did you ever have any questions in your mind when you heard about how those fundamentalists did not want girls to get an education and the way that they treated women? Did you run into any of that in the discussion about that particular aspect?
Actually, over there,
Uh-huh.
I mean, we saw it. It's hard not to see it, but at the same time, it's almost a catch-22. We're so ingrained with treating women with respect and equal rights over here, but over there for centuries, that's not how it's been. Even in some of these more moderate, pro-Western Middle Eastern countries. And so while we can understand it or agree with it, I also think that we felt that we couldn't say anything or try and change it because it wasn't our country.
Right.
If we were trying to change these people to our way of life, then we would just be stepping in the place of the people that we had ideally freed them from.
Do you think that was one of the mistakes of the policymakers that sent troops into those areas? They did not study nor really fully understand the differences in culture and religion?
I think that could have been a part of it. If you read kind of some of the history books that have been written about Iraq and Afghanistan, mm-hmm. you'll see that maybe some of the greatest strides towards actually achieving a concrete goal were by your special operations forces, who had the kind of cultural training that your basic infantryman or tanker didn't have operating in those theaters.
Now, when you came back and talked to your wife, or even if you Skyped with your wife, and you told her some of these perceptions you had of how women were treated, did you get any conversations with your wife here in the United States that has all of these freedoms, and her reaction? I don't know if you want to share her name or not.
Her name's Amanda.
Amanda, okay. Did Amanda discuss some of this? Oh my goodness, I'm glad I didn't get raised up in that culture.
She did. She also came from her grandfather was a World War II vet, okay. An infantryman.
Okay.
And so she already kind of had a sort of appreciation for what she had. And so when I told her some of these things that I saw, she was just even more grateful to be able to live here. And she made a joke about how she could wear jeans, which you'd never see over there. At least I never did.
Right. Well, even our culture has changed. My wife Shanna, we talk about it sometimes. She could never wear jeans to church. You always had to wear dress and get nice, fancy clothes and everything. And culture has changed. It's much more laid back in the United States now than it was even when we got married in 1960. Things have changed, especially. Well, we have about 4 minutes remaining, and I'm sure glad that you were willing to come on the show and have a little conversation with us about this. And I want to thank you for your service to the United States of America.
It's my pleasure, really.
When you were in uniform, did you have people come up sometimes in restaurants and shake hands and say thanks for your service?
Quite often, yes.
What'd that do?
To be honest, it was always uncomfortable. I had volunteered to do it, and by the time I got married, the way I saw it is, it was what I wanted to do, and it was the way I was supporting my family.
Yeah.
So I didn't really feel that I needed the things. Their tax dollars paying my paycheck wasn't enough.
And now they're helping you go to school.
Yes, sir.
And you're going to get it. When you finish at community college, are you going to go into UTEP, or where are you headed?
Yes, I'm going to go to UTEP and study political science there.
Oh my goodness. Well, that's where I got a master's degree in 1967. They just changed the name of the school to UT El Paso from Texas Western. I was there when they won the National Basketball Championship in 1966. Some exciting days. So I hope you get some exciting professors out there at UT El Paso.
I'm sure I will.
Do well with all of those classes. What have been some of your other subjects that you've taken classes in, second to political science, that you've enjoyed at community college?
History. I really enjoy history, but that's been since before I went to school. And then probably intro to film with Dr. Carr.
Oh, good. Okay, well, we have some interns here that are in this audiovisual medium and filmmaking and photography and all of that, so we're glad that you've had a great time at community college. And again, we want to remind our audience to tune in from time to time, because I have a variety of guests. Some people ask me, where do you get these guests? And I say, I find them from throughout the community. And I don't just interview movers and shakers and celebrities and people like that. I interview people that are really important in the general community of El Paso, Texas. David, thanks for being a part of El Paso.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, you're quite welcome. Join us again someday. I'm Leon Blevins.